Chapter 8. I ain't eating none of that Mex food, Arapaho Brown blustered. It's not Mexican rap, Dandy Jim assured him. Seems to me you didn't mind gorging yourself on tamales and chili when we was down Sonora way, Cyclone put in. That was different, Rap said with a pout. We was in Mexico, and that's what you're supposed to eat there. This ain't Mexico. We're in the city, and we're supposed to eat highfalutin stuff here. Well, Rap, this isn't Mexican food, Dandy Jim tried to explain. There were several cardboard cartons spread out on the table. Lots of people like this in St. Louis. Just look. He opened one of the cartons, and it was filled with chicken bits with a shiny glaze. The aroma was interesting. Sweet and sour chicken, this is. You do like chicken, don't you, Rap? I sure do. I've been stealing chickens all my life and cooking them myself, but I never had none that looked like that or smelled so good. After Kitty, Cyclone, and Dandy Jim had finished their visit with Abigail Carlin, they had gone to a nearby hotel and arranged for rooms. Then they went out to get food to take back to Paco's. They had brought home Chinese food, sweet and sour chicken over rice. Rap dug into the dinner with great relish, as did the others, but they refrained from telling Rap what it was until the meal was over. When Rap leaned back in his chair, rubbing his oversized belly and burped heartily, Chief Henry laughed and said, "My goodness, Rap, your eyes are already slanting up on you and you're turning yellow." "What do you mean I'm turning yellow? You know I ain't yellow." Everyone began to laugh and Rap looked around quizzically. "What he is saying, Rap, is that you've been eating Chinese food," Dandy Jim said. "What?" Rap said. "You gotta be joshing me. That was too good to be chink food." "Well, it is," Jeremy put in. "You mean it's turning me into a chink? Slanty eyes and yellow skin and all?" "No," Kitty said. "That can't happen." "It can't?" He turned to Cyclone. "No, it can't," Cyclone assured him. Rap smiled and leaned forward, reaching across the table. "Then I guess I'll just have some more." After supper, they all went back to the hospital. Abigail had just finished her meal, and an orderly had just taken her tray away when they entered her room. She was elated to see Jeremy, and they both cried as they held each other in a big hug. As Jeremy broke away, he said, "I want you to meet my friends, Arapaho Brown and Chief Henry." Her voice was frail, but there was a bit of a glint of amusement in her eye as she indicated Chief Henry. "Is he a real Indian?" she said almost conspiratorially. "No, ma'am," Henry said as he stepped forward. "Just a fake one. You're Cy's good friend, aren't you? I've read about you in those books they write." "Well, if I were you, ma'am, I wouldn't take too much stock in what you read. Not much of it has any truth to it." They visited a while until the nurse came in and told them that Abigail had had enough excitement for one day and it was time for her to go to bed. All were in agreement that they should all call it a day. Tomorrow would come soon enough. Mid-morning the next day, Kitty, Cyclone, Jeremy, and Dandy Jim were back. As they once again stepped off the elevator that was still a wonder to Cyclone, they were met by one of the nurses who informed them that Abigail had not had a good night and was still in bed. They were warned not to excite her too much. The warning had not been necessary, for Abigail was asleep as the foursome entered. They stood silently over the foot of her bed and watched her sleep with shallow breaths. Her diaphragm hardly moved. Is she still alive?" Kitty was almost afraid to utter the words. Jim Butler stepped forward to the side of the bed. He placed his left hand on her brow, and with his right he lifted her wrist and felt her pulse. He nodded to Kitty and smiled. "She's all right." But she looks so gray," Kitty said. "Yes, much more than yesterday. Let's see what her doctor has to say. I'll go see if I can find him." He hurried out. Abigail's eyes opened and she smiled at Kitty. "You've got a very nice young man there, Kitty. He's so kind." "Yes, he is," she admitted. Kind, she meant. She didn't know if he was her young man. Jim was suddenly back in the room. "The nurse said Dr. Lane will be in shortly," he said. Then, seeing Abigail's eyes open, he said, "How are you feeling today, Mrs. Carlin?" "Don't Mrs. Carlin me, young man," Abigail scolded. "Just call me Mom." Kitty felt flustered. Her mother was assuming something that she wasn't sure should be assumed. Jim glanced from Kitty to Abigail. He smiled to her. "That would be nice, Mom," he said. "I don't have one of my own." "What's going on in here?" A commanding voice behind them sounded. "We don't allow this many visitors at once in here. You want to kill this woman?" A tall, lean figure in a full-length white coat whipped past them and leaned over Abigail's bed, a right hand immediately grasping Abigail's wrist to feel for pulse. "I'm all right," Abigail protested. "Besides, this young man already checked my pulse." "He did he? Well, I'm the doctor here." Then turning to face Jim Butler, the doctor suddenly drew up short with surprise. Jim's jaw went slack also. The doctor before him was a woman. Straw-colored hair had been cut short, thick strands falling to the nape of her neck. She wore horned-rimmed glasses that hid her light blue eyes and any attractiveness in her lean face. She had a strong jaw and pointy chin, but if one were to look hard, a soft feminine veneer could be discerned. Seconds ticked off as each of them stared into the face of the other. Finally, the doctor exclaimed, "Why, Dr. Butler, what are you doing here?" Jim was dumbfounded. Kitty, Cyclone, and Jeremy were all caught off guard. They all stared at him as if accusing him of something evil. Jim shifted back and forth on his feet, definitely uncomfortable. His secret was out, and what made matters worse, the woman standing before him was Cora Lane. Kitty, Jeremy, and Cyclone were practically busting at the seams in curiosity for the rest of the day, but Jim Butler carried on as if nothing was out of the ordinary. He offered no explanations, and was careful not to engage any of the others in eye-to-eye contact. As much as he tried to hide his embarrassment and guilt, it was obvious that he was most uncomfortable. "What do you suppose he never told us about being a doc?" Cyclone had whispered to Kitty one time while Jim was engaged with talking to Dr. Lane. "If he'd have wanted us to know, he would have said so," Kitty answered. "I suspected it that time he helped those homesteaders back home." "That's right," Cyclone mused, rubbing the point of his chin. "I wonder why—" Kitty cut him off sharply. "Never mind. If he wants to talk about it, it'll be in his own good time. For now, it's none of our business." "You sure about that?" Cyclone said. "Yes, I'm sure," Kitty admonished with irritation. At the same time, she was watching Dandy Jim's rapport with Dr. Cora Lane. Her green eyes could see the ease that Jim and Dr. Lane conversed. A sudden concern and a bit of sadness tugged at her heart. Mid-afternoon, they had all met in Dr. Lane's office. She explained that Abigail Carlin was suffering from a tumor in her stomach. It was growing, and the prognosis for survival for any lengthy period of time was nil. She also informed them that there was a hospital in Chicago that had had success in treating this type of tumor. It would involve surgery and a new experimental treatment using radiation. Kitty and Jeremy had a little understanding of the term radiation, but it meant absolutely nothing to Cy. None of them had questions about it. They were all in agreement that they were in favor of doing whatever it took to help Abigail. "It will take a lot of money, and she'll need constant care," the doctor cautioned. "Whatever it takes," Kitty assured her. Cyclone and Jeremy nodded their agreement. That night, after a long day at the hospital, Jeremy went back to Paco's, and Cy and Kitty retired to their rooms at the hotel. At 8 o'clock, a rap came on Kitty's and Cyclone's door. It was Dandy Jim Butler, and he was asking Kitty to go for a walk with him. She agreed and got her shawl. They went out, and for once, Cyclone had no reservations about it. Hopefully, Kitty would come back with the answers he'd been dying to hear all day. There was chill in the air with the daytime sun gone. Lexington Avenue was fairly quiet with light traffic. City lights spread out as far as could be seen and cast a false, reassuring glow of safety, belying the realities of danger hidden in the shadows and darkness. They walked a while, making small talk, neither one bringing up the day's revelation concerning Dandy Jim Butler. "You're wondering—" He stopped suddenly in his tracks, swung around to face Kitty, and suddenly started to blurt it out. "You don't have to tell me, Jim," she said, putting her finger to his lips and gazing into his eyes. He gripped her hand with both of his and pried the fingers away. "I have to tell you, though," he said. "You have the right to know." "Jim," Kitty said, "I don't have any rights." Her gaze lingered, searching his eyes as if asking for an answer. "Or do I?" She wanted to add, but didn't. "I didn't tell you before, because I'm not a doctor. At least, not anymore." He was still holding her hands. "But it seems so natural for you, and Dr. Lane thinks you are." There was a little concern showing through on that last part. She didn't want to ask more. Didn't dare. "Cora Lane and I went to the same medical school right here in Missouri," he explained. "She doesn't know what happened afterwards." He was silent for a moment. Kitty's urge was to ask, what did happen? She didn't. "I joined the cavalry," he started to explain. He didn't want to add the next part. He didn't want to hurt Kitty by mentioning it. Then, deciding he couldn't explain without bringing it up, he added, "With Kip." Kitty's eyes widened. Jim gripped her hands tighter. He could feel the tremble at the sound of Kip Dalton's name. He could see the sadness in her eyes. She didn't have to say what Kip had meant to her. "Kip and I were always close growing up, more like brothers than the cousins that we were. He had been in the cavalry all the while I was in medical school. When I received my degree, he talked me into joining the cavalry with him as a physician. There was always a need for doctors there. God knows it was rough. Gunshots, arrow wounds, knife wound, cholera, diphtheria. You name it, I saw it. Half the time, I could do nothing but listen to the misery and watch people die." "I'm sure there were those you helped and lives you saved," Kitty said. "Yes, I know that now," Jim said. "But at the time I was worn out, overworked, and overtired. I drank a lot and wasn't always at my best. When Kip's wife—" "Kip's wife?" Kitty exclaimed. "I didn't know he had been married." He never wanted to talk about it afterward. "What happened?" "Childbirth went wrong. I told Kip we'd lose her, but we had a chance to save the baby." "His wife died?" Jim nodded. "We lost the baby too." "Kip blamed you?" "He never said so, but I'm sure he did. God knows I blame me. I was half drunk at the time. Anyways, Kip left the cavalry. I quit shortly after and went after him. I followed him from town to town and game to game. He gambled a lot, and soon I was gambling too. At times we drifted apart, but from time to time we'd catch up with each other. Kip would pretend he didn't blame me, and perhaps he didn't. But seeing me, being near me, only made the memories more vivid. He'd disappear from my sight as quickly as he could. You know what happened after that." "But he wasn't a bad man," Kitty uttered. Her eyes misted, and the street light glistened on the wetness. "Not really. No, but I could never stop him from doing bad things." "You can't blame yourself," Kitty said. "And you're still a doctor, aren't you?" "I have the paper that says I am, but I'm not." "I think you are," Kitty said emphatically, "and Dr. Lane does too." Jim was silent. "I know I have no right to ask, Jim," Kitty started, not really wanting to continue, but she had to know. "Does she, seeing you together with her?" Uncomfortably, Jim cut her off. He shook his head back and forth. "Does she mean something to me? Of course. We went to medical school together. It was rough on her being the only female in school. I tried to talk her into quitting. I told her she would never make it in a man's world. I was wrong, and I'm glad she stuck to it. She's a fine doctor, and you're lucky to have her for your mother." Kitty forced a smile as if she understood, but her real question went unasked and unanswered. Did Dr. Cora Lane mean anything more to him then and now? Not wanting to go further with the discussion, Kitty said, "It's getting cold out here, Jim. Let's go back." Jim smiled. Yes, it is a little cold. He pulled her toward him, and they both held tight, shutting the chill out for a while. Chapter 9. Arapahoe Brown was restless, cooped up in Paco's apartment for days, and he was bored stiff. By the third morning, his restlessness had gotten the best of him, and he was getting out of control. He had emptied 2 bottles of his so-called medicine, and he needed to get out and get some more. He was also hankering for that highfalutin food they serve in restaurants. He had been listening to the noise outside on the streets, and he was curious about all the shouting he heard in the afternoon from a couple of streets over. Paco had told him it was something called a baseball game, and people went to watch baseball players play the game. Bunch of fellers beating up on another bunch of fellers? Is that what it is? Not exactly, Jeremy said, but I suppose it's something like that. Would you like to go to a game and see what it's like? I sure would, wouldn't you, Chief? He added, turning to Henry. There's another game today, the St. Louis Browns against the Pittsburgh Pirates, Paco put in. I don't know how much of it I'd see, Chief said, but I'd like to go, maybe get a hot dog. Hot dog? Rap said. What do you want a hot dog for? To eat, Paleface. What else? You mean to tell me you want to eat a hot dog? You mean you cook him? No, Rap, Jeremy said. It's not a dog like what you're thinking. It's a long, round piece of meat in a bun. You know, like a sandwich, only it's long. Some people call them wieners. Wieners? Rap laughed and slapped his thigh. You stick 'em in buns? Now I know you're loco. Robeson Field was the home of the St. Louis Browns and was located just south of Fairgrounds Park and bordering Prairie Avenue, Van Deventer Avenue, and Lexington. Home plate faced a deep center field at 500 feet. Right field was 290 feet deep, and left field measured 470 feet. A mighty lopsided field. The main entrance to the park was a covered structure, and the grandstands could be reached from any of 4 stairways. A beer garden beneath the grandstand garnered Arapahoe Brown's attention right away, just after he calmed down from the tizzy he had worked himself up into when they entered the park. First off, he thought he was being ripped off by paying a whole 25 cents for a mere piece of paper. Jeremy tried to tell him it was a ticket that would allow his entrance into the ballpark. He had become even more irate when the attendant at the game took his ticket from him and tore it in 2, handing the stub back to him. Hey, I spent a lot of money for that piece of paper. You got no call to tear it up on me. Chief Henry and Jeremy had all they could do to restrain Rap from belting the man. This day's game was against the Pittsburgh Pirates. Starting pitcher for the Browns was Red Arrett, and the catcher was Heine Peltz. Jeremy, Chief, and Rap had seats about halfway up the grandstand, directly behind home plate. What's he throwing the ball at that guy for? Rap said with concern when Arrett pitched to the first Pittsburgh batter, who swung and hit the ball, sending it to the right and into the stands. Is he mad at him? No, Rap, Jeremy started to explain. The man throwing the ball is known as the pitcher. Like what you put water in? Rap interrupted. No, that's just what they call him. He throws the ball to the batter. The one with the stick? That's right. Only the stick is called a bat, and the man swinging it is called a batter. Just then, the batter hit the pitched ball and sending it into the stands to the left. Oh, I get it, Rap smiled gleefully, and he tries to hit people in their seats. I sure hope he doesn't take a dislike to me. No, Rap, Jeremy said. He's not trying to hit people. Those balls he just hit are called foul balls because they didn't go where they were supposed to. He's supposed to hit the ball toward the other players in the field ahead of him. What? He doesn't like them, fellers. He tries to hit them. What do they do? Dodge the ball? No, They try to catch it and try to put the batter out. Just then, the batter hit the ball high into center field, dropped his bat, and ran for first base. The ball dropped in front of the center fielder and took a hop off the ground into the fielder's glove. He readied himself and threw the ball to the first baseman just before the batter reached first base. Dejectedly, the runner turned and walked off to the side of the field to join his teammates. Why'd he run right toward those fellers? Look how mad they were. They threw the ball at him. No, Rap. They didn't try to hit him. They only wanted to put him out. Out cold? Look, Rap, let me explain to you how this game is played. Once Rap settled down and listened, he finally got the gist of everything, and he began to enjoy the game. The next two batters got hits and were on base when the fourth batter got up. He missed the ball 2 times, fouled it 3 times, and failed to swing at the ball 4 times. He then tossed his bat down and walked to first base. How come he didn't have to hit the ball, and why is he walking? Rap complained. Because he had 4 balls on him, Jeremy answered. Really? You gotta be kidding. I'm surprised he can even walk. The afternoon wore on, and in the bottom half of the 7th inning, a runner came sliding into home plate. The ball sailed over his head as he slid between the catcher's legs as the catcher tried to block entrance to home plate. He caught the ball and tagged the runner as he simultaneously touched the plate. The umpire made an arcing swing of his arms and snapped his fist down. "You're out," he shouted. The crowd jumped to their feet, shouting indignantly, protesting the umpire's decision. Boos and catcalls came from the stands, and the crowd started to chant, "Kill the umpire! Kill the umpire!" Rap jumped to his feet. "They can't do that," he shouted. "They can't kill that man. He didn't do nothing wrong." He turned to the crowd behind him and shook his fists. "You can't kill him! You can't kill him!" The chanting was continuing, and no one could hear Rap except for the people sitting close to him. They all looked at him as if he were a crazy man. "Well, I ain't letting nobody kill nobody here today," Rap shouted angrily. His hand disappeared beneath his coat, and when it reappeared, his pistol with the 9-inch barrel was in his hand. Seeing what was happening, Paco, Jeremy, and Chief Henry lurched from their seats and attacked the wild-eyed Arapaho Brown. Rap tried to avoid them, his pistol rising high above his head. Jeremy, on Rap's right, wrapped his fingers around Rap's wrists. Rap's arms straightened, holding the gun higher and skyward. Chief Henry came from the other side, grasping Rap's arm above the elbow. Paco rammed into Rap's midsection. The crowd, suddenly realizing what was happening, ceased their chant and started screaming with terror. The pistol roared, smoke pluming from the muzzle, just as a camera from the press box framed the wide-eyed foursome of Jeremy, Chief Henry, Paco, and Arapaho Brown, their faces full to the camera. The shutter clicked, and they were frozen in time. Miles away, frozen in time, the image of Arapaho Brown, pistol high in the air with a puff of smoke emanating from a 9-inch pistol barrel with an excited Jeremy Carlin. Chief Henry II Osel Tolliver and Paco Morales, wrapped around the big man's body, trying to wrest the weapon from his hands, peered out from beneath the headline of the next day's issue of the St. Louis Globe-Democrat. "Fans go berserk at ball game." "That's them, all right," Simon Price said, grinning like a Cheshire cat that was about to catch a canary. "So, they're in St. Louis. I wonder what they're doing there." He was almost saying it to himself. But it was also meant for the ears of Sheriff Harvey Trask, who was leaning lazily against a file cabinet along the wall adjacent to Simon Price's big mahogany desk in his office at the rear of the Fortune City Bank, formerly the Thistle Creek Bank, before the renaming of the town as Fortune City. The name change had been a tribute to the city's most powerful citizen, Simon Price. Across the office in a far corner on the opposite side of Price's desk, Flo Baxter languished in a big leather stuffed chair. She was bored as usual and didn't seem to be the least interested in Simon's discovery. Her long blonde hair, coiffed gaudily high on her head, spilled out onto the back headrest of the chair. Her chubby behind barely fit the seat without completely wedging her in. As much as Flo was disinterested, Harvey Trask's interest had suddenly been piqued. He suddenly straightened and pushed himself away from the file cabinet to step behind the slightly rotund banker to gaze over his shoulder and look at the paper. He chuckled at the silly and grotesque pose of the Wildcat gang members. "Idiots," he muttered. There was an amused smile on his lips, almost hidden by his drooping gray mustache. "Yes, they are," Simon agreed, leaning back in his chair and patting the bald spot on the back of his head as if he could cover it with a few strands of hair. "I don't know what they are doing there, but now that I know they are out of our hair, perhaps we can proceed with the plan." "I don't know, Simon," he said. The amusement on his face suddenly disappeared, and a grimness spread over his craggy face. "It's dangerous business, even with the Wildcats out of the way. Remember what happened last time. Matt Starr is still around, and that other feller got himself killed. I think we can work around that pesky marshal this time, Harv. Let me show you what's on this other page." He flipped the paper open and spread it out on his desk. "I see what you mean, Simon," Trask chuckled, feeling a relief from his original fears. "Looks like our boy's going to be a bit preoccupied for a while." Then, as realization set in, he said, "But that Dalton fella's dead." "We'll just have to find us someone else," Simon smiled thoughtfully. At the mention of Kip Dalton's name, Flo Baxter was suddenly interested. She pushed herself into an erect sitting position. "What are you hatching up now, Simon?" she said accusatorily. "Nothing. Nothing that concerns you," Simon said without looking up. Then, when he did, he said, "Don't you have some work to do out front?" It was more an order than a question. "Since when? Do I have to work?" she answered surlily. "Well, go out there and don't work," he blustered. "Just get out." "I don't have to have a wall fall on me to take a hint," she said sarcastically, as she lifted herself lazily out of the chair. She adjusted her skirt that fitted too tight around her expanding hips and sauntered out of the office, closing the door none too gently. "You got someone in mind, Simon?" Trask eagerly asked as soon as the door closed. "I'm not sure," Price answered. "I need you to get in touch with my son." "I thought you sent Conrad away?" "I'm not talking about Conrad. I'm talking about Rafe." "Rafe?" Trask exclaimed. "He's probably in jail somewheres." "Then get him out." Simon thumbed the paper back and once again stared gleefully at the picture of Rapp and the others. Miles away in Kansas City, the same picture, Wildcats frozen in time, in another copy of the same newspaper, appeared on the desk of Willard Morton, chief investigator for the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Two other male detectives and one female detective stood around his desk. "You're sure these are the men you saw on the train?" he asked of the female agent. "Yes, sir," she said. "At least 3 of them are. I never saw the Mexican man before, though." "And the thieves you captured on the train identified these men as members of the Wildcat gang?" "Yes, sir, and there were 2 more, an old man and a girl." "That would be Wildcat Kitty and the Cyclone Kid," Morton explained. "If these 3 are in St. Louis, you can bet the other 2 are too. I'll send a wire to our branch office in St. Louis. Maybe they can track them down." Morton grinned broadly. "Good work, detective," he said, extending his hand to the female detective. She smiled triumphantly. She had just proved women were just as good as men. Chapter 10. Once again, the frozen image jumped off the page of the St. Louis Globe-Democrat. This time, the paper was being held in the slender hands of Dr. Cora Lane. "Your friends made the morning newspaper," she said to Jim Butler as they walked side by side down the hall. She handed him the folded paper. He took it, glanced at it, and chuckled. Leave it to Rapp to make a spectacle of himself. "I heard about what happened at the ball game, but I didn't figure on it making the papers. Mind if I keep the paper for a souvenir?" No, that's fine, she said. By the way, there's another article about Arizona on an inside page. You might be interested. Thanks, I'll take a look at it later. Kitty, can I see you for a minute? It was past noon when Jim Butler entered Abigail Carlin's room. Kitty and Abigail were sitting near the window. Sure, Kitty answered, turning to look at him. There was a grave expression on his face. The folded morning newspaper was under his armpit. Something wrong? I just need to talk to you. Out in the hall. Okay, she smiled at her mother and said, I'll be right back. She arose from her chair and hurried to the open door. A look of grave concern washed over Cyclone's face as he watched the two of them disappear into the hallway. Let's walk, Jim said, taking her by the arm. There's something I haven't told you, Kitty. I can't explain why. Only I didn't want to hurt you. I had hopes that things would work out differently. What on earth are you talking about? Jim pulled up short, turned to face Kitty. It's about Matt. I should have told you. What's happened? Her face went pale with fear. Did something happen to him? Her lips began to tremble, and a tear welled up in her eye. It's right here in the paper. I didn't want to tell you, but you have the right to know. With trembling fingers, she accepted the newspaper. It was folded so only the pertinent column appeared. The headline read, Arizona Territorial Governor's Daughter to Wed Lawman. Underneath was a picture of Matt Starr embracing Barbara Stanton in the flower garden of the governor's mansion. What did your young man want? Abigail said when Kitty returned and sat down beside her. I hope there's nothing wrong. It was more of a question. She could see that Kitty had been crying. Her eyes were red and swelled bags drooped beneath them. Oh, Mom, Kitty sobbed. She handed the paper to Cyclone and bent over in her chair. Cyclone glanced at it and his face turned grim. Did your young man upset you, dear? Abby asked. Kitty straightened in her chair and glanced at her grandpa. She saw the concern in his eyes. She turned back to her mother and said, Oh, Mom, he's not my young man. Jim, he's not my young man. It's that Dr. Lane, isn't it? Abigail said acidly. I've seen the way those two have been carrying on. You have? Kitty said with surprise. I haven't noticed. She hadn't even considered the possibility. No, Mom, Kitty said. It's not that at all. It's someone else. I thought I no longer cared, but I do. She reached for the paper in Cyclone's big hands and gave it to Abigail. Abigail's expression was blank. She didn't know what she was looking at. Now, he's getting married, Kitty blurted through another onslaught of tears. Now, Abigail understood, and she finally grasped the essence of Kitty's concern. This is the man you really want, dear? She asked. But it's so impossible, Kitty said. He's a marshal and I'm... She glanced at Cyclone and saw him shake his head. Kitty mustn't tell her they were outlaws. He is a very handsome man, Kitty, Abigail said. Why do you think it's so impossible? You are a very pretty girl. Prettier than the one in this picture. That doesn't matter, Kitty said. It's all my fault. I'm the one that made it so impossible. Well, couldn't you change that? Abigail asked. Dot, I don't know. I don't know anything. All I know is I can't let him marry someone else. Then don't let him. Kitty jerked upright in her chair. The tears suddenly stopped, the last few still streaming down her cheek. But how? She didn't finish the question. Go back home, stop that wedding, and get your man. Abigail's eyes filled with determination. But Mom, we're going to Chicago, Kitty started to protest. You don't have to, Abigail said. You've made all the necessary arrangements. Paco and Dr. Lane will be going with me. Once you've taken care of what you have to do and I'm better, you can come visit me again. She's right, Kitty, Jim Butler said. He had been standing in the doorway behind her, listening. Kitty spun around in surprise. Jim was walking toward her. He put his hands reassuringly on her shoulders. "I've decided to go with your mother to Chicago," he said. "I've also decided that it's time I got back to being Dr. James Butler again." Chapter 11. The police patrol wagon, pulled by a team of sturdy draft horses, pulled up in front of the building that housed Paco's apartment. A policeman driver held the reins and kept the horses in place as two uniformed policemen and three Pinkerton detectives wearing bowler hats and dark suits with long black overcoats disembarked. The two uniformed policemen took up positions, one on each side of the front entrance of the tenement house, while the detectives circled behind the building toward the stairs at the rear entrance. It was up and down these stairs that Paco came and went from his apartment. It had not been difficult for the Pinkertons to identify Paco from the picture in the paper and trace him to his residence. Paco would be the key to capturing the Wildcat gang. "Police out front, senors," Paco announced. He was holding a curtain slightly skewed from the window. Rapp and Jeremy got up from their chairs and looked out. "I think we're in trouble, guys," Jeremy said. "There's 3 detectives heading around back." "You think they're after us?" Rapp asked. "They're not just coming to collect the garbage, Paleface," Chief said. They all started for the door. Jeremy had his hand on the doorknob when he heard the heavy footsteps clambering up the wooden stair. Heavy pounding on the door sounded, and the door seemed to be vibrating in its casing. "Open up," a deep voice demanded. "Pinkerton detectives." "What to do? What to do? Think fast." Jeremy slipped to the hinged side of the door, pulling Rapp and Henry with him. They flattened themselves against the wall. "Let them in, Paco. Stand back and let them come all the way in," Jeremy whispered. The pounding on the door hadn't ceased. The voice on the other side boomed again. "Open up in the name of the law." "Si, senors," Paco said demurely as he pulled the door open. The detectives charged through, pushing Paco back into the room. As the first 2 passed the open door, Jeremy shoved the door against the third man, pushing him aside and stumbling into a table that slid out from under him and left him falling to the floor. At the same time, Rapp stepped forward, swinging his pistol in a wide arc and bringing it down on the head of one of the detectives. His bowler hat was crushed and fell off his head onto the floor. Blood dripped from the gash on his balding head. The other detective was just turning when Chief Henry slashed him across his wide nose with the barrel of his weapon. The man dropped his own weapon, and both hands went to his face as he stumbled and fell. The third detective that had been surprised by the door slamming into him and knocking him to the floor was starting to rise. Jeremy gave him a swift kick under the chin and sent the man reeling back to the floor. While the 3 detectives struggled to regain themselves, Jeremy, Rapp, and Chief hurried out the door and ran down the steps. Chief stumbled, unable to see the steps clearly through his thick glasses. Rapp caught him and held him steady as they descended the stairway. There was no sign of the uniformed policemen out back, so it was a good bet that they were guarding the front entrance to the tenement. The 3 fugitives, reaching the foot of the stairs, ran into the alley and headed the other way to the street behind. They came out of the alley and found themselves on Lexington Avenue. A quick glance behind them told them the 3 detectives and 2 uniformed policemen were following hot on their trail. They had just entered the alley as the Wildcats emerged out into the street. Not really knowing where they were going, the fugitives ran into the street and turned to the left. Rapp had been in the lead and had taken the turn. The others merely followed him. The street was busy with pedestrians and horse-drawn vehicles and an occasional horseless carriage putting along the thoroughfare. Jeremy, Rapp, and Henry ran into the traffic, hoping to conceal themselves from their pursuers. They ran for a block before Jeremy looked back and saw their pursuers emerging from the alley into the street. They looked up and down the street, searching for their quarry. "Hurry up, guys!" Jeremy shouted to his companions, a few strides in front of him. Rapp was practically dragging Chief along. Here they come. He was breathing hard from the exertion. The detectives and policemen had spotted them and were now racing after them. The long coat tails of the Pinkerton men flapped about their knees and ankles. The traffic was impeding the progress of the fugitives, and a horseless carriage appeared just before them. The machine just chugged along as Rapp and Chief came abreast of it. "Move that thing out of the way," Rapp yelled as they came up behind what he had called a tin horse. The driver was a thin man in his 30s. He was wearing a long white duster and a silly-looking cap. Large black-rimmed goggles were fitted around his eyes. "To hell with this, mister," Rapp shouted in frustration. Still hanging on to Chief, Rapp reached out with his other hand and pulled the young driver from his seat in the vehicle. The man fell out into the roadway and rolled. The driver of a milk wagon pulled hard on the reins of his team of horses and barely missed running the man over. The machine rolled on, riderless, for a short ways, before Rapp leaped up into the seat, dragging Chief with him. Jeremy, seeing what his friends were doing, reached out with both hands, grabbed the top rail of the back of the carriage. He pulled his legs up off the ground, trying to wrap his legs around the body of the vehicle. He finally grasped a foothold and hung on like a bug on a big bug. "Get this thing moving," Jeremy shouted. "They're catching up to us. Hell, we could run faster than this." "How do we make this thing go faster?" Rapp shouted. "Got to give it gas," Chief yelled, reaching for a lever and pulling on it. The vehicle began to slow. The lever had operated a wooden brake shoe against the vehicle's rear wheels. "What are you doing?" Rapp cried. "Wrong lever, paleface." Chief pulled another lever. The engine blurted loud, and the machine jumped forward with a lurch. Rapp and Chief whiplashed forward and back. Jeremy bounced, and his feet hit the ground and were dragged forward. He was half dragging and half running as he tried to mount the vehicle once more. The carriage was now running faster than the rest of the traffic and was careening back and forth in the street. Only the curbing kept them on the road. "You've got to steer this thing," Chief Henry shouted. "How? Where's the reins?" Rapp answered. "No reins. You use a tiller." "What's that?" "It looks like a handle. Should be right in front of you." They rolled out of the street and up onto the sidewalk, crashed into a building and smashing a large display window before bouncing off and back into the street. "Nah," Rapp shouted. "It ain't there." Henry reached forward. He couldn't see it, but he could feel the vertical lever. "Never mind, I got it." He jerked the tiller toward him, and the carriage turned sharply to the right. The machine once again jumped the curb, spilled the fruit stand, and bounced back into the street. Jeremy, clinging for life on his perch at the rear of the carriage, shouted, "What are you doing?" "He can't see where we're going?" Rapp shouted. His eyes were bulging out of his head, and he felt sheer terror. The machine was now heading for the other side of the street. "The other way, Henry," Jeremy shouted. Chief swiveled the tiller, and the carriage barely missed the building on the other side of the street on the corner of Vanderventer. The vehicle slid around the corner and rolled on. With the help of Jeremy and Rapp calling directions, Chief was now doing a passable job of steering. There was little traffic on this street, but the police wagon was still positioned there in front of the tenement house where Pecos' apartment was located. The fugitives were now heading straight for it. Cyclone and Kitty were making their way back to Paco's apartment. When they saw the police patrol wagon sitting outside, they immediately feared something was wrong. Then they heard the sound of the horseless carriage and saw the hapless trio heading toward the wagon and them. Farther up the street, they saw the detectives and policemen running in pursuit. As the carriage with their friends passed the police wagon, and then them, Kitty and Cyclone broke into a run toward the police wagon. Cyclone had his gun out by the time he and Kitty ran up to the police wagon. "Hands up and get off of that thing," Cyclone shouted to the driver holding the reins. The man was taken by surprise and immediately dropped the reins, raised his hands, and started to step down. The horses stamped in place and the wagon wheels rocked a little back and forth. Cyclone pulled the policeman's weapon from his holster as the man's foot hit the pavement. He gave a shove, and the policeman sprawled into the middle of the street. In the fleeting instant that he rolled, he saw the horseless carriage returning and bearing down on him. His arm went to his face, and he screamed in terror, just as he rolled enough that the vehicle with the fleeing fugitives passed on by, barely missing him. Seeing Cyclone and Kitty climb into the police wagon, Jeremy shouted, "Rap! Henry, turn back!" Henry twisted the tiller. The vehicle swerved and came back, passing the wagon on the other side, and sped off down the street. Cyclone had passed the policeman's pistol to Kitty as she seated herself on the wagon bench. She leaned around the side of the wagon enclosure, bringing the pistol up. She fired at the pursuers, and they quickly spread out to both sides of the street seeking cover. Meanwhile, Cyclone settled himself beside her, taking up the reins and whipping the team into motion. They took off in pursuit of their companions. Once they could overtake the horseless carriage and get their friends aboard the police wagon, they would continue to make good their escape and leave St. Louis behind. They would go back home, and the Wildcats would ride again. Chapter 12. In the dimly lit back room of the Silver Boot Saloon at Hunter's Corners, 3 men huddled in conversation around a round wooden poker table. A cone of light from the lantern hanging from one of the roof rafter beams above the table breathed ominous shards of bare illumination, revealing the 3 faces, half in light and half in shadow. "You're sure about this man?" Simon Price asked. His rotund body shadow spread across the tabletop. "I can't afford another slip-up. I need to know I can trust this man not to turn on me." "I'm sure," the man on the opposite side of the table said. Even sitting down, one could tell that this man was tall and lean. He had a deep, jagged scar over his left eye. A heavy crop of black stubble covered the man's cheeks, hiding his somewhat youthful face. Although he was known as the Sonora Kid, his name was Raphael Price, Simon Price's eldest son. He had left home years ago, having minimal contact with his father, and had garnered a reputation as a gunfighter and oft-times outlaw. Simon had never mentioned his son's name to acquaintances since Rafe left home. He had been almost forgotten by folks back home, and with his current appearance, he would probably not be recognized in his hometown. Simon had not wanted to meet his son in Fortune City for fear of him being recognized. He felt he was taking enough of a chance meeting him in Hunter's Corners, in a secluded hideaway in the back of the saloon. "I've been double-crossed before, and I can't take that chance again," Simon reiterated. "This is the man who will get the job done," Rafe assured his old man again. His tone showed his annoyance with Simon's repeated rants. "That's what you said when you sent me that Dalton fella." Simon grimaced. I know. I didn't know the dude was crazy, but I know this man will get the job done. I spent 2 years in prison with him. I know him inside and out." "Don't worry, Simon," the third man at the table said. "Rafe knows his business." He glanced toward Rafe with a sly smile. "Besides, Rafe knows what I'll do to him if he's wrong." "I know what you'd like to do, Peso, but you can try." Peso Martin grinned, but a cold shiver had just trickled down his spine. Peso was also a tall man, but his strong, chiseled features were completely void of facial hair. He had dark hair peeking out from under his black Stetson with a silver concho hatband. He also wore a concho-studded black Buscadero gun belt that carried 2 holsters and matching black handled 6 shooters in each pouch that rode low on each thigh. He was Simon Price's segundo for the Big Dollar Ranch and his chief henchman. "Shut up, Peso," Simon ordered. "You 2 are going to get along, and there'll be none of this phony baloney posturing. You'll be backing up Rafe and his man just as we planned." "Okay, boss," Peso said, glad he had been taken off the hook with his bravado still intact. "Now, Rafe," Simon Price said, leaning on his folded arms against the tabletop and leaning forward, hunching his shoulders. Tell me just how your man plans to get the job done. Rafe described in detail what the plan was and how Simon was to carry out his part. When he was done explaining, Simon leaned back in his chair and smiled broadly. Yes, he said with satisfaction. I can see how that will work. In fact, I think it's absolutely brilliant. I can't wait to see it done. It was a bright sun-shining day for early October. The leaves of the trees had started turning to various hues of red and gold. The gardens of the governor's mansion was still a place of beauty, but the passing brilliance of summer had passed with colors beginning to fade into autumn gold. Barbara Stanton had wanted a church wedding and had hoped to have the ceremony at the First Presbyterian Church of Phoenix. Her father, Governor Hugh Stanton, wanted a larger venue that could accommodate more guests. As governor, he was always seeking publicity, and this was a great occasion to take full political advantage of. He had decided that the mansion gardens would be the perfect place for the wedding. Barbara had conceded to her father's request and had acquiesced, much to Matt Starr's consternation. Matt really didn't care where the wedding took place. What he took exception to was Hugh Stanton calling the shots on every turn. Somehow, Matt felt that he had sold himself out, always bowing to Hugh Stanton's whims and wishes. The fact of the matter was that he had sold himself out, and he felt much less of a man for it. But on this day of his marriage to Barbara Stanton, he stood there in the garden, with the sound of the rippling fountain behind him, with his best man, who had been provided by the governor, standing beside him. He had let those thoughts drift away. At the strains of the hired orchestra heralding the entrance of the bride, Matt stood straight and tall, just under 6 feet, and dressed in the first tuxedo he had ever worn. His blue eyes roamed over the crowd of seated guests as he anticipated the arrival of his bride. His heart leaped in his throat when Barbara first came into view. She was smiling and seemed to be floating on air as she proceeded down the aisle on her father's arm. All of a sudden, Matt Starr felt a strange sensation of excitement, happiness, and fear all at once. Was he doing the right thing? Of course, he told himself. He did want to marry Barbara, didn't he? Of course he did. But he cursed himself for having a fleeting memory of a girl with auburn hair and a campfire burning low on a dark, lonely trail. He was about to force the memory away, but as Barbara, on her father's arm, approached, the memory vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He smiled broadly as his bride stepped up beside him. They smiled to each other. Barbara was absolutely beaming, and Matt felt the surge of pride and happiness. As one, they both turned to face the officiating parson. Barbara's father was a half-step behind his daughter. The best man, bridesmaid, and attendants stepped into place on each side of the groom, bride and father. The Reverend raised and lowered his right hand, signaling the guests to take their seats. The Holy Bible rested in the palm of his large hand. The Reverend Paul Lynch was a young man. He was tall, and while not lean, he was well built with broad shoulders and trim waist that could be discerned beneath the black suit he wore, in stark contrast to the white minister's collar around his neck. A full head of neatly combed light brown hair, parted on the right and combed back, highlighted his light blue eyes. He had been a last-minute replacement for Pastor Larry Goodwin, who had suddenly been called away on a mission of mercy. The governor and Barbara had both been upset by the sudden change, but when Barbara cast her eyes on the handsome young replacement, she was fully satisfied with the situation. And since Barbara was satisfied, Governor Stanton was all right with it too. In mellow tones and practiced rhetoric, the parson began the ceremony. "Dearly beloved," he began, followed by the usual opening regarding the sanctity of matrimony and the leaving and cleaving. He had just reached the part about, "If anyone here knows why these two should not be joined," a sudden burst of noise and action arose. From behind the rows of spectators, a horse and rider roared into the aisleway. Two more horses and riders came from the sides, approaching the wedding party. One rider was leading a riderless horse, the iron-shod hooves of the horses trampling flowers, plants, and greenery in their wake. Two more riders and horses flanked the seated guests, who were already panicking and starting to run, but were held in check by Jeremy Carlin to the right and Chief Henry Two Owls on their left. They were all firing pistols into the air as they entered and skidded their mounts to a halt. The rider in the center aisle was Wildcat Kitty, once again dressed in her red checkered shirt and blue jeans astride her black and white pinto. "I have reason," she shouted. The Cyclone Kid, once again wearing his long gray duster, battered hat, and polka-dot bandana, riding his big chestnut mare and Arapaho Brown aboard his big gray stallion, reined up on each side of the wedding party. "Matt Starr," Kitty continued, "you can't marry this. She couldn't think of the word. Rap's got a horse for you. Get on it and come with us." "I can't do that, Kitty," Matt said. He eyed her levelly. By now everyone had turned and was eyeing her. "I'm going to marry Barbara, Kitty. That's all there is to it," Matt proclaimed. "No, you're not. You're getting on that horse." "No, I'm not. I'll shoot you if you don't." "No, you won't." "Well," Kitty said with a pause, "maybe not." Then she thought of something. "You can't get married without a parson." She shifted the muzzle of her pistol toward the parson and said, "You. Get on that horse. You're going with us." "Don't listen to her, Reverend," Matt said. "She can't make you go." I'll shoot him," Kitty stammered, trying to make it sound convincing and knowing it didn't. "No, you won't. You won't shoot him either," Matt said. "But I will," Arapaho Brown said, leaning from his saddle and placing the muzzle of his pistol against the parson's head. The hammer of the pistol snicked back, and there was a broad grin on his face. A trickle of sweat suddenly beaded on the Reverend's brow. His expression asked, "Will he?" And he glanced to Matt Starr for direction. "Yeah, he will," Matt affirmed reluctantly with a sigh. The parson took the reins, swung up into the saddle, and they all rode off in a clatter of hooves. Chapter 13. They rode hard and fast. They had not anticipated kidnapping a parson. Kitty had been so bent on stopping the marriage between Matt Starr and Barbara Stanton, she had not thought clearly at all. Cyclone knew this, but didn't know how to keep her from foolishly running in. He could never deny her anything, and he foolishly let her get them into a predicament that they might not be able to get out of. Mile after mile, they pushed their horses onward with no particular destination in mind. They just needed to get as much distance between them and the governor's mansion as quickly as possible. What was in their favor was that if they didn't know where they were going, it would be difficult for any pursuers to guess where they might be headed. But the horses were tiring, and finally, Cyclone called for a halt. Cyclone and Kitty had taken the lead while Jeremy Chief and Rap followed, keeping the minister in tow. "Girl," Cyclone said, "this ain't doing us no good, just riding no place. We need to figure out a plan where to hide and what to do with this feller. And while we're at it, we might as well think about what happens if Matt and the governor just gets themselves another parson and the wedding goes on anyhow." "I know, Grandpa," Kitty said, almost with a whimper. "I guess I just made a fool of myself, didn't I?" Cyclone nodded. "You wouldn't be the first." Matt Starr had changed into his usual range clothes. Gray shirt, bloused at the shoulders, dark gray striped trousers, poured into black stovepipe boots, black flat crown, and flat-brimmed hat. A black leather pistol belt encircled his waist, and black-handled pistols rode in holsters on each hip. He was in the mansion's livery, saddling up his sorrel stallion, and was just tightening the cinch when Barbara Stanton said from behind him, "Do you really have to go?" "Yes, I do," he said without turning to look at her. It's my job. Can't you let someone else do it? We could send for another minister and go on with the wedding. He dropped the stirrup down and turned to face her. We've gone over this before. It's my fault that I've never put Kitty and her gang away before. She's gone too far this time. I can't let her get away with this. Are you sure it's not because you are still in love with her? Her eyes flashed as she said it. He grimaced. You too. If I don't do this, that's exactly what your father will think. He angrily took up the reins, led the sorrel out into the yard, swung up into the saddle, and rode off. You don't really think he's coming back, do you, Hugh? Simon Price said. He was sitting in the plush leather chair in front of Governor Hugh Stanton's huge mahogany desk. He was in formal dress as he had been one of the guests for the wedding. He had a glass of brandy in his hand. I really don't know what to think, Stanton answered, taking another swig of his drink. He had been totally embarrassed and humiliated. His guests had to be dismissed, and he felt totally disgraced. He hadn't yet thought about his daughter's disappointment. Matt Starr's been sweet on Kitty Carlin for a long time. That's why she's not in jail. That woman's a menace, I tell you. A menace, Simon Price continued. But he didn't go with her when she broke in, Stanton mused. In the back of his mind was the deal he had made with Matt Starr. Everybody was watching then, Simon said slyly. Then, too, he may have changed his mind later. What are you trying to do, Simon? Stir me up? Confuse me? You're doing a good job of it. I just think you need someone to make sure that Starr comes back and this wedding goes on. If we get the parson and the Wildcats besides, so much the better. I can send Peso Martin and some of my men out if you want. I suppose, as usual, there's something you want in return? Hugh, as much as you're not going to believe this, there is absolutely nothing I want from you. You're right, Simon. I don't believe it. This is another fine mess, Simon Price blustered, once again huddled in the back room of the Silver Boot Saloon at Hunter's Corners with Peso Martin and Raphael Price. I don't care how you do it, but get him back there. I'm really sorry, Reverend, Kitty said as she handed him a tin plate with some beans and jerky on it. She also had a tin cup of hot coffee for him. They had found a secluded spot behind a copse of trees where there was water and grass for the horses to graze. The sun had been down for an hour, but the half moon in the clear sky gave them light to move about the camp. They kept the campfire low. We'll get you back home before morning. This was a really stupid thing for me to do. She sat down next to him. I take it that you are in love with the groom yourself, he said, smiling broadly. I think I can understand the impetuousness of it all. I guess he really didn't want me after all, she said sadly. I really don't see how that could have been the case, the parson said reassuringly. Kitty looked into his face and saw kind eyes. Somehow she felt better. God, how handsome this minister is, Kitty thought to herself. I really am sorry about all this, Kitty repeated the apology. The minister waved his hand. No, don't worry about it. You haven't harmed me any. Well, you're very kind, Reverend, considering the inconvenience and all. I've been inconvenienced before, he said. His voice was soothing and smooth. His eyes were warm and sensitive. You're so forgiving, Reverend, Kitty said almost with disbelief. We should all forgive each other, my child, just as our Lord forgives us. I don't think the Lord can forgive me for all the things I've done, Kitty said wistfully. Of course he can. Besides, I don't believe you've done anything so awfully bad. Oh, Reverend, you just don't know. Aren't you the one they call Wildcat Kitty? Then you know about me? I know you've done some bad things because bad things have been done to you. Two wrongs do not make a right, so that's no excuse. But I know you have also done some good things too, and I know your heart is against evil. So don't judge yourself too harshly. You'll be judged by a higher power someday, and if your heart is right with the Lord, you will be pardoned for any wrong you may have done. You really think so, Reverend? Kitty brushed back a tear and smiled broadly. No man had ever talked so eloquently to her before. No man had ever made her feel so good. I know so, Kitty, he said. He reached over and took her hand. He squeezed it gently. And there's no need to be so formal calling me Reverend. After all, I am just a man too. Why don't you call me Paul? He smiled softly, invitingly. I'd like that. I'd like that very much. Kitty suddenly felt elation, much like what she had felt before with Matt Starr, then Dandy Jim Butler, and most recently with Kip Dalton. Her fingers began to tingle and her stomach had flutters. Was she just a silly, impressionable girl, falling for every handsome, smooth, talking man that came along? But Kip was gone. She had left Jim for Matt, and Matt had rejected her. Maybe none of them were right for her after all. Maybe this nice man of God wasn't either, but something about him moved her. Did she still have growing up to do? Or was she now grown? Had she learned something? She had to hold herself in check this time. Okay, Paul, she managed to say. As soon as we finish eating, we'll take you back. There's no hurry, the parson said, and I can make my way back by myself. There's no use in any of you going with me and risking capture on my account. I can just sack out here for the night and ride back in the morning. Besides, it's not safe to be riding at night. A horse could step in a chuck hole without seeing it and come up lame. Well, if you're sure, that's the way you want it, Kitty said wistfully. That's the way I want it, Kitty. But I must say, it was a real pleasure meeting you, and I will be sorry to leave you in the morning. Same here. There was a choked sob in her throat. The gray of early dawn peeked through the tops of the trees that partially covered the camp. Dampness dripped off the leaves and the morning chill stirred the slumbering forms beneath their blankets, encircling the burned-out campfire. Jeremy Carlin had fallen asleep on guard sitting against the trunk of an ash tree. At the stirrings of his compatriots, he jerked awake, perused the perimeter of the camp, and satisfied himself that all was well before anyone else was awake enough to know he had shirked his duty. Within minutes, the camp was alive with activity. A fire had been brought back into life, and a meager breakfast with coffee had been provided. By the time everything was loaded, horses saddled, riders mounted, and the saint left behind as they emerged into open country, the sun was just breaking over the eastern horizon. Shards of red and purple streaks splashed against the encroaching pale blue of a cloudless sky. Before turning in the night before cyclone, Kitty and the others had decided that it was time to lay low for a while. They would head off toward the Colorado mountains to Pop Dawson's outlaw hideaway in the Sacramento mountain range. Pop had created this haven for outlaws many years ago and had called it Robin's Roost. No one ever knew why he called it that, but a lot of good did come out of the endeavor. When they rode out of Phoenix, they had continued southward and eastward, crossing over into southern New Mexico. It would not be good to linger too long in this area, for Snake Gunderson and Manuel Gonzalez rode this territory, and the Wildcats knew that if they were to come in sight of either of their enemies, there would be hell to pay. They would ride on northward for Colorado. Since they would be riding north for a while, and Phoenix was somewhat off to the north and then west, Reverend Paul Lynch would ride with them for a ways. By mid-morning, their trails would diverge and he would ride on. This seemed to be a somewhat congenial arrangement for both Kitty and Paul. They seemed to enjoy each other's company, much to Cyclone's consternation. As he rode beside Rap and behind the couple, Cy groaned, I said it afore, and I'll say it again. That girl's gonna take a heap of growing up. It was at that moment that a gang of 20 riders appeared on the ridge to their right. The middle rider wore a wide Mexican sombrero and crossed ammunition belts on his chest. It was Manuel Gonzalez. He pulled his pistol from its holster. The other riders did the same. They spurred their horses and came thundering down the hill toward the Wildcats, firing rapidly as they came. Chapter 14. Without taking time to draw their weapons, the Wildcats and Reverend Paul Lynch whipped their mounts to the left, digging spurs into horses' flanks and lashing them across their necks with excess rein length. There was flat land ahead of them for perhaps 100 yards. Then it dropped down into a ravine about 50 feet deep into a dry wash. Bullets were coming closer, but still out of range as their pursuers half slid their horses down the hill. As Manuel and his men hit the flat land, the Wildcats were already sliding their horses down the ravine. As they slid into the dry wash, the fugitives turned to the right. The wash was only wide enough to accommodate 3 riders abreast. Cyclone, Chief, and Arapaho were in the lead, their dusters flapping in the wind as they rode, pall-mall, along the dusty river bottom. After a couple of 100 yards, the dried-out river trail began to fan out into a broad expanse of desert dotted with ocotillo and cactus. The sides of the dry wash were still steep with shale and rock outcroppings on top, but were beginning to slope downward toward the expanse of desert. Manuel and his riders were still back there, behind them, and gaining on them. A fusillade of gunfire was still ringing in their ears, but none of the bullets had come close. The pursuers were still too far back and out of pistol or rifle range. As the width of the dry wash widened enough so the Wildcats could all come abreast of each other, they whipped their mounts around to face their attackers. In one sweeping motion, they pulled their weapons. Cyclone, Jeremy, Rap, and Chief pulled Winchesters from their scabbards, levered rounds into the chambers, and let loose blazing rounds. By now, Manuel and his riders were in range, and their bullets were coming close to the Wildcats, zinging past their heads. As the outlaws came closer, their aims improved. The bandits were still in the narrows of the wash, and only 3 riders could be firing. The lead 3 all fell from their saddles as Wildcat rifles thundered in the mid-morning air. As the riders spilled from the saddles, their horses reared and stumbled in confusion. The horses directly behind them plummeted into the melee and in turn stumbled. There was mass confusion as the remaining riders and horses slammed into each other and bottlenecking the pursuers into a self-made trap. The Wildcats turned their mounts and galloped off as fast as they could, keeping their heads down. The firing behind them continued. A lead pellet drilled a hole in the crown of Rap's hat and singed his hair. "Holy jeez!" he shouted as he felt the sting. He swiveled in the saddle and fired back 3 times, taking no time for careful aim. He didn't see one of the banditos fly backward out of his saddle as one of Rap's bullets punched him hard in the chest. The rider fell into the melee of riders behind him and was trampled by oncoming hooves. Bullets were still whistling close through the air around the fleeing Wildcats. Too close for comfort. Suddenly, Jeremy Carlin slumped over in the saddle as a bullet caught him high in the back of his shoulder. Pain and nausea clouded his vision, and he fell to the ground as his horse ran out from under him. His rifle had slipped from his grasp and landed out of reach as Jeremy rolled onto the hard, packed ground. Dust spewed up around him. Stunned, Jeremy, face in the dirt, managed to turn his head enough to see the onslaught of riders coming straight for him. Placing his palms on the hard pack beneath him, he tried to rise and reach for his pistol. Pain racked his entire body, and he fell back into the dust, rolling to the side and trapping his holster and pistol beneath him. The outlaws were approaching fast and coming close. Jeremy rolled over, face down, and covered his head with both hands. Gunfire kept roaring about him, and he didn't see that his companions were not about to abandon him. The Wildcats had taken a stand and were firing frantically at the pursuers. The Reverend had dropped from his saddle, running toward Jeremy and stooping to retrieve Jeremy's fallen rifle. Bullets chewed up the dirt at the Reverend's feet as he scooped up the weapon. A bullet tugged at his shoulder sleeve just as he rose to a crouch, firing and levering rounds in the Winchester with lightning speed. Several outlaws fell from their saddles, and the remaining riders slowed their mounts. Several others began to turn their mounts in retreat. From the rear of the outlaw pack, Manuel Gonzalez, who had stayed back to keep himself relatively safe while he allowed his men to take the brunt of battle, called to his men, "Pull back, amigos. There will be another time." As Manuel and his men made for retreat, the Wildcats' firing slowed, and soon the outlaws were out of sight. Silence was deafening as the firing totally ceased. "Rap!" Cyclone shouted. "Catch up the boy's horse." Without a word, Rap reined his big gray around and rode off toward Jeremy's horse, a short distance away. Cyclone, Kitty, and Chief guided their horses over to where the Reverend had just helped Jeremy to his feet. Kitty's face had screwed up like she was about to cry. Her lips were pursed tight, and her jaw was hard set. Sunlight glinted off the teardrops in the corners of her eyes. "Are you all right, boy?" Cyclone asked as they drew near. The Reverend was holding Jeremy up on wobbling feet. "Sure," Jeremy said. He was a bit breathless, and the words came shaky. "Just shot to pieces, is all. What do you think? And don't call me boy." Cyclone folded his hands on the pommel of his saddle, lifted and shifted his weight as he turned to Chief and Kitty. "Yeah, he's just fine." Kitty managed to choke out a chuckle between her clenched lips. Her shoulders twitched up and down. It was hard to tell if she was laughing or crying. At any rate, she was relieved to find Jeremy could still laugh it off. She knew he would be all right, even though blood was still dripping from the wound in his shoulder. Rap rode up, trailing Jeremy's horse. "Man, I never seed a preacher man like you afore," he said, as he handed the reins of Jeremy's horse to the man in black. "Me neither," Cyclone cackled. "Where did a man of the cloth like you learn to shoot that away, and ain't you supposed to be against killing and such?" Reverend Paul smiled and said, "Even Gideon rose up to smite his enemies. So did David against Goliath and Samson with the jawbone of an ass." "Huh," said Rap. "I don't get it. An ass ain't got no jawbone." "It's a different kind of ass, Rap," Reverend Paul said. He glanced Kitty's way and grinned with amusement. Kitty smiled back, feeling much better now. But in her mind, she wondered about this marvelous man. How was it that he was so skilled with a rifle and so cool in combat, as if he were used to it? "Well, speaking of jawbones," Cyclone said, taking the reins up and leaning back in the saddle. "Don't you all think we ought to quit jawing and get out of here before those fellas come back? Jeremy, can you ride?" "Of course I can. I'll bet you'll fall out of the saddle before I do." Kitty smiled. Jeremy was going to be fine. In a matter of seconds, Jeremy was loaded into his saddle. He was still dizzy, but he managed to hang on to the pommel tight enough to keep him in the saddle, though slumped forward over the horse's withers. Rap rode close beside him with the reins of Jeremy's horse in his hands. It was time to put as much distance between them and their pursuers as possible. Once again, they had no idea where they were headed. Just away for now. But eventually, they would have to find a way to head off for Colorado and Pop Dawson. Chapter 15. Matt Starr had circled and circled for several hours after taking up the trail after Kitty and her gang. During his many confrontations with Kitty, he had learned that there was a place that they liked to hide out in, somewhere in Colorado. That was all he knew about it. But chances were that eventually she would head in a northeasterly direction if she were to choose to hide out. Just before dark, he picked up a trail of 6 riders. Tracks of 5 of the horses did look familiar, but he couldn't be sure. He had tracked the Wildcats before, and these certainly did look like tracks he had followed many times, especially the 2 big horses that could possibly be Cy's big chestnut mare and Rap's big gray stallion. In the fading light, it was just too hard to tell for sure. He hated to quit the trail so early, but he wouldn't make much progress in the dark anyway. Besides, His quarry would have to hole up for the night, too. They would all be moving out with an even start in the morning anyhow. He found a good spot under some trees and near a stream to make camp. He stripped the saddle off the sorrel, rubbed him down with grass and ground, hitched him where he could graze and get water. Then he built a small campfire, not caring about creating smoke, for there was no need for secrecy out here, and got some coffee boiling. He had a bit of bacon, some sourdough, and some jerky. Nighttime was completely on him, and he was completely surrounded by darkness, save for the light of his campfire and the half moon that filtered down through the tops of the trees by the time he had his meal ready. He was about to take the pan out of the fire when he heard a deep voice shouting, "Hello, the camp!" Matt left the pan where it was, half rose to his feet, his hand on his right pistol grip, and the weapon half slipped out of its holster. "Who's there?" Matt answered warily. He couldn't see the owner of the voice. "Friend? Mean you no harm? Saw your fire? Could use a cup of coffee if you can spare it." "Show yourself," Matt instructed. He stood all the way up, his gun now fully drawn and at the ready. Low-hanging branches of trees in front of him parted, and a horse's head, chest, and forelegs emerged. A big man lowered his head to avoid the branch. A wide-brimmed, high-crowned hat covered his head and shaded his face. As he emerged into the light of the campfire and raised his head, Matt could see the man's broad, craggy face. He was a man of about 50 and beefy around the middle. The campfire glinted on the silver star pinned to the man's vest. Behind him, 2 more men emerged. They were both smaller men. One also had a silver star, but the other one had his hands tied to the pommel of his saddle. "Name's Tom Vestry," the big man said. "Sheriff out of Century City. This other feller is my deputy Wade Miller, and the ornery little cuss we got tied up is Billy Tyreen. He's a bank robber. Him and his brothers Kenny and Jimmy robbed the Century City Bank yesterday." "A bit out of your jurisdiction, aren't you, Sheriff?" "Century City's in Colorado, and I judge we must be in New Mexico." Matt was still holding his pistol in hand. "We've been hot on the trail of these skunks. I reckon we lost track of where we was. Besides, I'm taking this one personal. They shot one of my deputies and killed a woman who just happened to get in their way. I'm going to get them with or without jurisdiction." "Just the same," Matt said. "This is New Mexico. You won't be able to take them back." "Then we won't," Deputy Wade Miller put in. Matt glanced in his direction. The man was thin and wiry. He had thick blonde hair that looked like it hadn't been washed in ages, and he sported a ragged, full beard. "We'll just shoot them and turn them in for the reward. They've each got $500 on them, including this one." He nodded toward the prisoner. He spoke with a chuckle that sounded more like a snort. "So, are you lawmen or bounty hunters?" Matt said icily. "Lawmen bounty hunters," Vestry said matter-of-factly. "Don't make no difference nohow. Justice is justice. So what if we make some money at the same time?" "So, you're tracking these men as bounty hunters," Matt supplied. "Then jurisdiction don't make no difference nohow." Vestry smiled. "Guess not," Matt agreed. "Then if you got no more questions, friend," Vestry said, "how about you put that hog leg of yours away and invite us to stay?" "Oh yeah?" Matt said absently, as if he had forgotten he was still holding a gun on them. Matt forced a smile, trying to hide his distaste for these men. He released the cocked hammer and dropped his Colt into its holster. "The name's Matthew Starr. Come on ahead. Step down. I've got coffee on, but I'm afraid I don't have much food to share." "That's all right, friend," Vestry said as he lifted his bulk out the saddle and swinging down. The big man winced as his right foot took his weight on the ground. His hand on the pommel steadied him as brought his left foot down to take the brunt of his weight. He caught his breath and limped toward the fire. Wade Miller alighted from his perch, gathered up the reins of all 3 horses, and tied them to a young sapling nearby. With total lack of feeling for the young outlaw, Miller pulled the lad from the saddle and let him fall like a sack of potatoes onto the ground. Tyreen grunted as he landed. The horses stamped and milled about at the sudden movement near their hooves. Matt Starr winced to himself at the brutality of it, but tried not to show it. He was going to let things play out before he would show his hand. He figured it best not to give away his identity as a lawman just yet. "Hurt your leg, Sheriff?" Matt asked as Vestry lowered his body carefully to sit on the ground next to the fire. He held his right leg out straight as he sat. Matt could see the pain registering in the big man's ruddy face. Matt squatted beside Vestry, picked up an empty cup, lifted the coffee pot from the fire, and started to pour. "Got shot a couple of weeks back," Vestry said, accepting the cup. He raised it to his lips and sipped briefly. "Damn, that's hot. Strong, too. Just the way I like it." The deputy had just dragged Billy Tyreen close to the fire and squatted down on the other side of Matt Starr. Matt gave him a cup and poured. "How about him?" Matt nodded toward Tyreen. "Coffee for him, too?" "Nah," Miller said, taking his cup of coffee. "Little sumbitch don't deserve nothin'." He took a sip from his cup, smacked his lips, exaggerating his satisfaction, and raised his cup toward the bound lad. Tyreen licked his lips with want. "Do you, sumbitch?" Miller chuckled, then drank some more. Tyreen grumbled under his breath. "Bastard," he hissed, as he tried to wiggle himself to a sitting position on the ground. "I don't think it would hurt to give the lad a little," Matt said, reaching for another cup. "Well, he don't get nothin'," Vestry snarled. The look on Vestry's face was enough. Matt thought, best I back off. "You said you got shot?" Matt asked Vestry again, avoiding confrontation. "What happened?" Vestry's hardened stare softened a bit and let the prior affront go. "Yeah, damn Wildcat gang," he said after taking another sip. "Wildcat gang?" Matt blurted in surprise. "Yeah, you heard of them?" Vestry said. Matt tried to tone down his interest. "Seems to me I have, but tell me, where did you meet up with them?" "They held up a stage, the other side of Century City. Shot me in the leg and got away with $100,000. I was riding guard. That old man they call the Cyclone Kid shot me. Then they all drove away with the stage. Killed the stage driver too." "Are you sure it was the Wildcat gang? I've heard that they rob, but I never heard of them killing people." "Well, they do," Vestry said. "I seen them with my own eyes, and they left me lying in the dirt, thinking they had killed me too." "Do tell," Matt said matter-of-factly. There was more he needed to know about this so-called lawman. "Do tell."